Okay. Hi, everyone. So, welcome to Wise Youth's webinar today. And I'm not sure how many of you guys are from the Financial Quotient series, but today we're going to have a separate webinar, and it's going to be more based like a conversational one. So today we're joined by Antong Hou, who's currently a Harvard student studying a freshman student studying economics and statistics at Harvard University. So later I'll let him do his own introduction. But before we get started, I just want to preface a bit how today's webinar is going to run because it's a bit different from like a typical one or like anything we've done before. So instead of having the main part being more like a lecture based or like a presentation based given by the speaker, it's going to mainly be focused on the Q&A section. So here students can just put any questions they have relating to school, like university applications or like university life in general. They can ask any questions that they like, and they can use the Q&A feature or the chat box to ask these questions, and then Anton can just answer it throughout the webinar. And I think today will be a great opportunity for students who are thinking to apply to universities in the States or like any university, because Anton has a lot of experience and insights in these areas because he both applied to Canadian schools as well as US schools. So please don't be shy to ask any questions that you have. And yeah, that's pretty much it for on my part. And I'm just going to hand it to Anton now, who will do his very own introduction. And you guys can just start asking any questions you have in the chat box or the Q&A section. Thank you so much for coming as well, and I hope you enjoyed today's webinar.
Hey everybody, I hope you're all doing well. Thanks for coming in today, and thanks Queenie for having me. Um, Sort of did the whole intro, so probably not too much more I need to add. My name's Antong. I'm currently a freshman here at Harvard College studying economics and stat. The econ is probably pretty set, but stat maybe not. Sort of dabbling in computer science, stat, and applied math. So probably one of those in the end, but pretty loose system, as with most liberal arts colleges. So I'm originally from Ottawa. I don't know where all of you are from. Maybe you can put in the chat where you guys are from, just so I have a little bit of a better understanding of where people are tuning in from. Uh, um, Anybody? I mean, I don't see anything in the chat. I'm just gonna assume that you're mostly from, maybe the chat is off as well. Not too sure. Anywho, so I'm originally from Ottawa, Canada. Oh, I see Montreal, Vancouver. All right. Oh, I see an Ottawa, Vancouver. Yeah. So seeing some Ottawa, some Vancouver, some Toronto, maybe. New York. So we have people from all over the place, basically. So it's nice to see you all. I'm originally from Ottawa, so hi to everybody here who's also from Ottawa. I went to a public school in Ottawa. I was born and raised there. Spent my whole life there before coming to the States for school. And yeah, I guess I have a little bit of insight to share on applying to the States as an international student for those who are from Canada. I see we do have some Americans in here though, as well as applying to schools in Canada and applying for some of the more prestigious Canadian scholarships, like the Loran Scholarship, the University of Toronto National Scholarship, Queen's University Chancellor Scholarship, all things like that. Um, Someone's asked me which school in Ottawa. I went to West Carleton Secondary School. So it's just like a public high school near my house. So it wasn't an IB school, wasn't an AP school, nothing, I guess, fancy, just the standard public high school in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. And I guess just before I start, I always like to say that just because I go to Harvard, I think there's a big rep that comes with that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, I'm crazy smart or anything like that. I know sometimes I walk around here and I don't feel that bright. So very much just a normal person, never went to the Olympics or never did anything that crazy. At least I don't think so. So I hope that, I'm able to just share some knowledge that could be useful for you all if you're thinking of applying to the States or applying for, again, for some of those scholarships in Canada. And Again, you don't have to be a once in a generation type of student to be accepted into these types of schools. So if you can create a compelling application, you do have a chance. Um, Obviously, a lot of luck's involved as well. I benefited from, a lot of luck, not just in the application process, but also just throughout life. So also just because I recommend, none of this is like, I guess, the one size fits all advice. So just because I did something or I recommend something doesn't mean that it's the only way or doesn't mean it's something you have to do. Again, just because I didn't do something or maybe I even have strong opinions against something also doesn't mean that you can't do that thing. So honestly, just take everything with a grain of salt. I also hear that this is sort of like a financial literacy thing. So if people have questions about like finance or careers in finance, things like that, I'm happy to talk about how that works in the recruiting cycle for that and things like that as well. Um, it would be best if people could put I mean, not chats, questions in the Q&A box. It's just a little bit easier for me to monitor that. So perhaps like we can use the chat as a place for like if I ask questions, then you guys can answer in the chat. But then if you do have questions, it would just be best if you can pose them in the Q&A box, and that way I'll just be able to see them populate kind of thing. But I do see there is a question in the chat, so I'll do that one first. Um, Someone's asking, can you talk a little bit? Oh, and also, by the way, this whole thing is meant to be very, very informal, just sort of like a conversation. So feel free to ask whatever you want. You have questions about high school, you have questions about university life, whatever, what is Harvard like? What are your friends like here, etc. Things like that. I'm happy to answer. So someone is asking, can you talk a bit about your life now in Harvard? So great question. Um, I guess one thing I like to say is university is not as busy as high school is for most people, at least not in the sense of the extracurriculars. I think a lot of people in university don't do as much outside of class as they once did. Like I know a majority of the time that I spent, or I guess like the majority of my day in high school, or the majority of my week was spent on sort of the extracurriculars I did. Was a competitive figure skater and things like that. So it took up a lot of my week, and I don't do things like that anymore. I'm involved in some like campus clubs, some finance related clubs. If you guys have questions about that as well. So really, what happens is at Harvard, no classes start before 9, which is a nice change because my high school started at 8, and it was close to my house, but also wasn't that close. So I'd probably have to wake up at around, 7, maybe 6:50, something like that on most days. Whereas now I wake up on the much later side. So usually I go to class, and if I start at 9, I probably end around 2. So a decent amount of class, but then some days are lighter. Like today, I had class from 12 to 3, but that was it. So I got to start very late today. I was able to, go to play some basketball in the morning. Um, and then after class, there's a lot of homework, that's for sure. I went to, again, a public school with no APs, no IBs. So my academic rigor wasn't that intense as a high school student. So that was definitely a big adjustment when I came here. I do a lot of homework, like a lot of studying here as well, like, many hours a day, probably at least 4 or 5 hours of studying outside of class a day here, which is obviously quite a bit. And then every once in a while I'll have some club meetings, or I'll have like there's like a sports game here. Let's say Harvard's playing Yale or something. Um, I like to play basketball with my friends, like to watch movies, just do very typical things. So yeah, honestly, yeah, some clubs, a lot of schoolwork, and spending some time with the people here, because really people always like to say, like what makes these schools different, and it really is like the network around you and the people around you. So it's best to, I guess, make the most out of that. Someone said, what makes you stand out when you apply to college? Sure. So, I also have some questions on the side that were asked in advance. So, feel free to keep on putting questions in the chat. But if people stop putting questions in the chat, I'll go to the ones that I have. Um, so, very common question. People always like to ask, how did you get in? The truth is like you never really know for certain why you get in. Obviously, if you're one of those very special people, like if you go to the Olympics or something like that, then you can, you know, pretty much put your finger on why you got accepted to a top school. However, for most people, it's not that simple. I'd say for 99% of applicants, you're not really able to point out one reason. So I like to always split up like why I got into three categories, and that is activities, so like extracurriculars, academics, and something that they like to call personal traits. So I think it's very important that you're able to succeed in those three categories because a lot of these schools in the US, especially all the Ivy Leagues, emphasize something called a holistic application or a holistic review. So they're not just looking at one thing. They're not hoping that you're just good at one thing. They want the whole picture to be good. It's that holistic process. They're looking at like the whole painting of who you are, not just a little piece of it. So I mentioned I was very busy in high school with extracurriculars. Um, I was a competitive figure skater, so I figure skated basically my whole life. I think I started when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. Um, Throughout high school, I was, going to skating practice 5, 6 times a week. I'd be out of town competing every once in a while as well. And I did go to nationals. Never won anything, was never even close to winning anything, but did go. So that was that. And then also did some other stuff in there. Like I did some volunteering as a skating coach for many years as well. And then my other main activity, I would say, was my work in student government, education policy, and education advocacy. So I've always been involved in student council and in Ontario. I know not all of you are from Ontario, but in Ontario, there's a position called student trustee within public school boards. So in that position, I sat on the governing board of my school district. So that was the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. Um, the rest of the board was composed of municipally elected adult trustees and senior staff, like superintendents and directors, etc. So our school district oversaw, I think, like 75,000 students across roughly 150 schools. So I went to a lot of meetings, led a bunch of groups, worked on many projects, took part in things like budgeting and things like that for the school district. And then I did a lot of work in education advocacy at the provincial level. So I was the vice president of an organization called the Ontario Student Trustees Association, which was just composed of those student trustees that I just mentioned earlier, about 80 of them or 90 student trustees. Um, and I did some work with the Ministry of Education and just a lot of like political advocacy in that realm. And those two were probably my main things when it came to activities. But I also did a bunch of other random things. I was on the track team at my school, so track and field. I'm pretty short though, so wasn't very good. Um, did a bunch of other random things in high school as well. I think it's good to show that you have hobbies and that you have other interests as well. It's not ideal to just be a robot, right? You want to seem like you're still a normal, personable kid. You want to be relatable. So you want to, I guess, do great things, but you also want to do some things that you just do simply for your own enjoyment and let them see that you have things like that. I'm sorry, I'm also a little bit sick today, so I'm going to be coughing a lot. I was up all night coughing yesterday, so this is on the better side at least. And honestly, like in my opinion, extracurricular is probably one of, if not the most important thing for your application, just because they show another side of who you are. There's so many great students with high grades and good test scores, etc. But the more layers you're able to add, the smaller the pool of students becomes. I like to say, if like you have this huge circle of people with good grades, this is how big the circle is when you put in good grades and strong activities. The circle gets smaller, right? And you want to make it smaller and smaller and smaller. Um, And also just on a personal level, like I think people often ask like what activities should you do? I think honestly, you just want to do things that you're passionate about, things that you find interesting. Those are the things that are easiest to be good at, right? It's easier to be good at something that you care about. And I always like to think of it as if you knew you were not like you would go on to be rejected from all of the universities that you want to go to, would you still do that activity? And you want to find the activities that you would do regardless of the value it would add, or I guess the value it would add to your application. Obviously, you don't want to be doing useless stuff, but um, like, I think it's important to find things that you genuinely do enjoy. I know this is going to be a long answer, but I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. And then like I mentioned, personal traits is another thing. So that's sort of the personal qualities, the personality type of piece, and it's a little bit more complicated and confusing, but it just refers basically to the essays and the recommendation letters. The most important thing that people oftentimes forget is that these schools, they don't admit accomplishments, they admit people. What I like to say is Ivy Leagues like to admit kids that they think have high potential. For example, now that I'm at Harvard, I don't figure skate anymore. Um, I don't do much political work anymore. I've kind of transitioned my interests. And for the vast majority of kids here, that's sort of how it goes. They shift completely after high school. They do different things. They have different interests. They study different things as well. Most people at Harvard will um, switch majors at least once. So, these admissions offers officers don't even know what you're going to study. They don't know what activities you're going to be doing. They don't know what career you're going to have. They're not going to they don't know how your interests are going to change. So what they're doing is they're looking for people who have high potential. They're looking for, I guess, in a very basic term, they're just looking for good people, right? And their whole idea is, well, I don't know what you're going to study. I don't know what you're going to do. I don't know what job you're going to have. But I trust that if I give you this foundation, if I give you this platform, if I give you these resources of this great school, you'll go on to do something good. And that's all the faith that they need. I think like the reason why recommendation letters are so important is the whole time your application is just you talking about why you deserve to be admitted. It's you saying why you deserve a spot, why you're excellent, why you should take me for Harvard, for example. But the recommendation letters serve as one of the rare moments where it's somebody else advocating for you. It's somebody else fighting for your spot. It's somebody else saying that you deserve a spot. And that's way more impactful than you saying that about yourself, because obviously you would say that about yourself. And then I guess when it comes to essays, you want to use your essays as an opportunity for the admissions office to feel like they're meeting you. The easiest way to stand out is through your essays, because the admissions officers, they're not going to remember your exact SAT score. They're not going to remember your exact GPA, but they will remember how you made them feel, and you're able to make them feel connected to you or related to you, or just make them feel impacted by the essays that you write, or intrigued by the essays that you write. That's a very, very easy way of boosting your chances significantly. And then the last thing was just that academics piece. I purposely leave this for the end because I think it's the least important out of those three areas that I've listed. No, that's not to say that it's not important. Of course, you need to have high grades, a good test score, etc. But that's the baseline. It's not the differentiator. I like to say that's what gets you to the door, but the other stuff is what lets you open the door and walk in. Good grades only lets you knock. And then it guarantees that, I guess, they'll answer the door, but doesn't mean that they'll let you in. I guess we'll move on to the next question. Please feel free to keep the questions coming. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Someone says, how do you decide your major and what's your extracurricular? Okay, I think I touched on the extracurricular, so I'll ask about I'll cover how do you pick your major. This is a good question. Honestly, interests change very fast. So I think if you're still young in high school, there's not too big of a rush on trying to figure out what you want to study. I didn't know what I wanted to study for a long time. When I was little, my dream job while I was still in I don't know how young. While I was in elementary school, I wanted to be a truck driver, like a long haul truck driver with the huge trucks and you drive across the country type of thing. I wanted to do that. And then I wanted to be a doctor. So I wanted to, which specialty? I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And then I shifted to wanting to be an anesthesiologist, so still pre-med. And then I shifted to wanting to be a surgeon, and then shifted from that to wanting to study business. And then now I'm studying economics. And I will at least try to pursue a career in finance, or in the business world, one of the finance sort of sectors. And I think, again, it just comes down to what you're interested in. I think that what matters maybe is not necessarily what you're studying, but how good you are at what you choose to do. There's money to be made everywhere, so that's your metric. Uh, People often, I guess, look down upon things like English majors, etc. There are a lot of English majors here at Harvard who go on to be show writers for The Simpsons, and they make millions of dollars a year. So they do very well, and they're very good at what they do. One thing that I looked at when I guess, was looking at a major and a career path is I like doing things that have a tangible impact. I like talking to people. I like sort of that personable aspect of life. So I wanted to be in a job where, relationships meant a lot, where you would have to meet new people, you'd have to talk to clients, build relationships with clients and things like that, make deals, negotiate, um, be able to see sort of the actual impact of my decisions. That's something I really liked. So that's why I'm in business. I also get bored relatively quick, so I like the idea of every day is a little bit different in business. I guess like if you're a surgeon, maybe after a certain amount of time, you're just doing the same surgeries over and over again. So I guess that's sort of how I ended up where I am. Don't really know, obviously, if that's going to stay the same for the I guess duration of my university years. Maybe my interests will change. But for now, that's what I want to do. I think some people are asking if I can speak Chinese or if I am Chinese. I am. Um, my parents immigrated to Canada, but I was born in Ottawa. I can speak Chinese, uh, but I think I'm much more coherent in English. Um, yeah, I think my mom answered a message in the chat as well. So I think my parents are here. Sorry, excuse me. Alrighty. Let me see. What am I missing? Ah, sorry, I keep on getting lost in the chat. Someone says, I know that in your high school, there weren't any available AP courses. Did that impact your college academics? Yes and no. A little bit of both, I guess I'll say. So one thing that I found very difficult when I first came to Harvard was the amount that I had to study. In high school, I honestly did not study very much. Um, I found partly because I didn't have that much time because I was always doing other things. But also because I guess the material probably wasn't as difficult as some people might be accustomed to in high school, depending on where they go. So when I first came to Harvard, I would probably study more in a day than I used to study in an entire week. So that was a big adjustment for me, just the amount of time that I had to, I guess, spend. And also, like in some of my classes, for example, like I remember the first math class I took here, there was a lot of material that I didn't know. And it wasn't because I didn't understand it, it was just in high school I never learned it. Whereas a lot of other kids in high school had learned that stuff. So it made the transition very difficult. But I guess the flip side of that is the material, or I guess not knowing something because you haven't learned it is different than not knowing something because you have difficulty understanding it. So in high school, I was very big on trying to find efficient ways to study. What's the fastest way I can learn? How can I spend the least time and get the best grades? So a lot of those strategies still carried over to school now, and those strategies are what helped me, catch up and help me to do well. Uh, and right now I have a 4.0 out of 4. So 4 out of 4 GPA here. And it's not that I'm like a super genius or anything like that. Like, honestly, a lot of the stuff that I learn here, I find very confusing and very hard, and it takes me a long time to understand. But I've sort of spent a lot of time, especially in high school. That's why high school is so important, figuring out the ways that work for me to study. And just use those strategies to learn as best as I can. Mm, Someone said, did you have to spend a lot of time out in your out of class activities for your university application? Yeah, I would say in high school I spent more time on, like, if we take away like actually going to high school, like going to school, the amount of time I had with the rest of my day was a large majority of that time was spent on my extracurriculars. Like after school, I would end school at around 2. In high school, I was like from around 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. or like 2:30. And then I would drive straight from school to skating. Took me about 30 minutes that drive. And then I would skate for about 2.5 hours and then drive from the skating rink to the school board office. And then I would have a school board office meeting probably until like 10 p.m. Sometimes I wouldn't even get home until midnight. My parents can attest to this as well. So, if I'm gone from 2 p.m. when school ends to 12 a.m., midnight, I have to go to school. I mean, I have to go to sleep, right? Because I have school the next day. So I didn't have that much time for studying. And that's, I guess, what sort of forced me to try to figure out what were the best study strategies or techniques for myself. Um, and I think sort of those strategies that I built through not having much time really helped me get through the first semester here. Someone says, what impresses you most at Harvard? Did you make some new friends? Um, well, I guess there's a lot of stuff here that shocks you at first. Um, like many of my friends, their parents are the CEOs of huge companies. Um, like in one of my classes, the one of the princesses from like Saudi Arabia is one of my classmates. Um, so the people that you meet here come from very, very interesting backgrounds, but they're, I guess, something that surprised me when I got here is how normal everybody seems. So obviously there are some people like you can tell they're probably very wealthy or are from a very, I guess, well-known family or they have some sort of famous lineage. But many of the people here who come from those very fancy backgrounds, you would never know. So, and there are so many kids here who, the majority of the kids here come from very, very seemingly normal backgrounds as well. So I think something that surprised me the most, but something that I really do like a lot about here, one of my favorite things here is just honestly the people and like how easy it is to get along with people, how great it is to have people around you who are very, very ambitious and who are very, very accomplished and who work very hard. Um, like when I first got here, I would study a lot because all my friends were studying a lot, right? So even if I wanted to do something with them, they were studying, so I had to go study with them. And we all help each other out and things like that. So I think that, like, honestly, the community here is very, very good. Everyone here, there's very, very little competition. Like, I could take my laptop right now, walk to the library, and say, "Hey, has anybody finished the economics homework for this week?" And someone, at least I know, guaranteed, somebody would be like, "What do you need help on? I can explain it to you." So it's a very, very tight-knit community. Everyone's here to help each other. Hmm. Someone says, what is your opinion? How do you feel the impact of AI over the university studying and major section? That's a good question. There, I've actually been to a couple guest lectures by some I guess, well-known economists here at Harvard, some economics professors and things like that. And while there are differing views, there is a common view that is shared with many people. I guess shared among many economists, and it makes sense to me. So obviously I'm no authority on this. I'm not in computer science or anything like that. Like that, I'm not an AI expert. But I guess I'll just share things that I've heard and things that I agree with. And that is, yes, AI is going to change things drastically, right? But it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to find a job. It just means the job that you're going to work is going to be different. And it also doesn't mean that, like AI is going to take away all the good fancy jobs and you're going to be left with nothing. An example that I guess I got from his name is Greg Mankiw. He's a economics professor here. And the example he gave was, when the computer came, for example, everybody thought that, the computer at that time was like the AI of now. it was a huge technological advancement. People were had no idea how it worked. People like the impact that it had on the labor market and the impact that it had on just society as a whole was huge, kind of like AI now. And people were scared, right? People thought, well, if a computer can do all of that, why would anybody need me? Why would like who would want to employ me? But what we just saw was that the impact, or I guess in terms of long-term impact on the labor market as a whole, wasn't very, I guess, drastic. Like the unemployment didn't spike because there were new computers, or the I guess average income didn't drop because the computer eliminated a lot of high-paying positions or something like that. But rather, people transitioned to fill the existing gaps, but also to fill the new opportunities created by, I guess, the advancements in technology. And yes, like I think there's a new AI that just came out that is apparently going to replace. I don't know if this is true, but I heard from some of my friends in computer science, it's going to replace like at, at least 50% of software engineers because that program, that AI software is able to, code just like a software engineer is. So obviously, like that's concerning. But I think, there's every field has a threat. So I think, yes, it's important to be aware of that, but also just try to see maybe what are you interested in that's harder to get replaced. Like people used to say, AI is never going to replace a person like a psychologist, right? Because there's that human element. But there are AI sort of like therapists and things like that that have been proven to be very, very effective. So in a way, again, I'm not an authority on this, but it's just a change in the world that's going to happen and we'll adapt like we always have, I think. Anyway, um, I see my mom's answering some questions here, which is good. So someone said, what was my SAT score? It was a 1580, but my mom beat me to that. Um, Someone's asking in a private message, please provide some perspective on how your parents influenced you in a positive way. Good question. Obviously, the whole process, no one ever gets in on their own, right? You always have had help. So, I wouldn't be where I am without my parents. I wouldn't be where I am without my older sister. I wouldn't be where I am without my skating coach. Without some of my great friends in high school and things like that as well. My teachers that I've had, a lot of people help you along the way, and I think obviously your parents probably help you the most. Um, I think one thing that I very much found helpful throughout my years, especially when I was applying, my parents didn't put much pressure on me, um, and they weren't very, I guess, controlling of my life. So I was able to make my own decisions. Was able to choose to do the activities that I wanted to do, to study what I wanted to study, to explore interests that I wanted to explore. And obviously, like an example I always like to give is in high school, my parents never once came up to me. Let's say I was watching YouTube or something on my phone, or just scrolling or watching Netflix on a school night. My parents would never come up to me and say, "Why aren't you studying? Like, why are you messing around? It's the school night. Don't you have homework to do?" Or anything like that. But that was because they knew that they didn't have to ask me that. Like they knew maybe I was on my phone, but maybe I had just been studying, or maybe I was planning to go study soon, or maybe I was just taking a break or something like that. So they gave me a lot of freedom, but in return, like I gave them a reason to give me that freedom. So that's a sort of dynamic that I found very, very helpful for me, at least. Obviously, different things work for different people. And also just, I think my parents always work, they always work very hard, like in their careers in terms of their whole life path as well. Um, like they went to school in China, then they immigrated, they had to go to school again. They had nothing or not a lot when they first came here. So, their start in Canada or their early lives um, were a lot different than what mine looked like. And like I think it's just important to recognize the opportunity that you have that your parents never had. Um, and you have that opportunity because of your parents and because they sacrificed a lot as well. Um, like sometimes when I'm over here and I'm looking at the nice campus and I'm in my room and I look at the tuition bill as well and I see how high it is. And I sometimes, I feel bad. Like, they gave up a lot, sacrificed a lot so that I could have like this, really like sometimes you forget because you get used to it, but like really a special opportunity. And yeah, I think it's just important to remember that. I think there's a lot of conflict that comes up between kids and their parents, especially around the college application time. But your goals in life, while they may not seem aligned, are very aligned. Your parents want you to do well, you want to do well. That's the bottom line. So I think just remembering that is always good. And I guess that goes the other way, right? Like if your parents are being a little stricter or anything like that, it's only because they want you to do well. And I guess like if your kid is being a little naughty, um, they don't their goal in life is not to upset you. They want to do well as well. I think sometimes uh, you know, the idea or I guess the plan that both of you have, maybe the destination is the same, but the route is a little bit different, and that's where some conflict can arise. But I think it's just important to remember that the end goal is the same for everybody. Someone's asking, do you have any friends in high school who also applied for Ivy universities? I know most kids in Canada go to Canadian universities. Good question. In my high school, I didn't know a single person who applied to America. Like, let me think. No, I don't think I know. No, I definitely don't have. No one from my high school is going to school in the U.S. And I don't know anybody who applied. And in my graduating class, there were close to 400 kids, so it's a pretty big high school. Definitely not a small one. But no, it wasn't really a thing. At least not at my high school. Uh, but obviously that depends. Like if I went to a different high school in Ottawa, some high schools in Ottawa have lots of kids who apply. But yeah, the majority still stays in Canada. I never thought I was going to get into the States. So um, like I thought I was going to go to school in Canada as well, and I applied to school in Canada and applied for scholarships here as well. So yeah, but the majority stay in Canada. It is very hard to get in as an international student for undergrad in America. The numbers aren't very good. I can go into the numbers if people are interested, but if not, I'll just keep that to the side. But yeah, the probability of getting in, the chances go up significantly when it comes to grad school. It's just a little bit harder for undergrad. Someone says, how do you compare Harvard with Yale? I mean, I don't go to Yale, so I can't say for sure. But honestly, they are very similar in many regards. The schools, both Harvard and Yale, seem to attract very similar individuals. More of the example I always like to give is people, I forget where I heard this from, but it makes sense to me. People say you go to MIT if you want to be like a scientist or if you want to be like a genius or if you want to be a researcher, something like that. And you go to Harvard if you want to be a CEO or you want to be a president. And you can see how there are different skill sets and different value sets between those two professions. One's not necessarily better than the other. They just attract different types of people. Um, and that's like that for schools in the US. So I'd say Harvard and Yale, like you'll see and you can usually take a look at the most popular majors. So Harvard, the most popular major is economics. And I think the second most popular is government, which is political science. And so many of my friends are pre-law. So many of my friends want to be politicians. So many of my friends are studying government. But then if you go to a school like MIT, it's mostly, I'm not sure about the rankings of the majors, but I'm sure it's mostly kids who are in engineering, computer science, math, life sciences, sort of that STEM side. Not to say that the STEM departments at Harvard or Yale aren't good, but they tend to lean more towards the sort of law and business and um, leadership and those types of things. But both very good schools. And I think there's like a rivalry between Harvard and Yale, and I think that just comes down to because they're very similar, so they like to compete against each other. Someone says, "Are you deciding your major?" I guess I'm still in the process because at Harvard you don't have to declare your major until about partway through second year. Um, but I'm pretty set on economics. I'm just trying to figure out what I want my other thing to be, whether that's stats or applied math or um, any other option that might be out there. They're very loose in the with the schools that are liberal arts curriculum based. They're very loose with the curriculum model. So it's very like if I wanted to switch my major, I could just send an email right now and say, hey, insert my academic advisor's name. I'm thinking of switching to studying this. And they'd be like, okay, that's fine. Here are some classes that you should probably take. Mm, sorry, I ended up scrolling to the wrong part in the chat. Someone says, how does skating help you? Good question. I mean, I don't skate much anymore. I have my skates in my dorm over there in my closet, but I haven't used them yet since I've been here. There's a little club on campus where people skate for fun. Um, I think it just taught me discipline from a young age. It's a very, I guess, cliche line, but in figure skating, you fall a lot, and every time you fall, you have to get back up. But that's the sort of, I guess, mantra that guided me through a lot of things in life. Um, there are many times in skating when you're learning a new jump, for example. The first 100 times, the first 200 times, every single time you try it, you're going to fall. And it's not a question of are you going to fall? It's just a question of how much is it going to hurt when you fall. Like, you're going to fall because you're still figuring it out. And I think that just that mindset, that ability to throw myself at things and just to work hard for things, um, I think helped me a lot. And obviously, sports just good for your health, good for your mind. So yeah, probably that. I mean, I wasn't a very athletic kid growing up until I started skating, so I think that it just helped me in that regard as well. Just built in some habits into my life that uh, still apply to other things, even though that those things might not necessarily be related to skating. Mhm. Someone says, sorry, I'm just getting lost in the chat. Do you think extracurricular classes are helpful for those who have just arrived in Canada? Um, I mean, I guess it depends. Um, I think that there are some skills that are just very crucial no matter what you are planning to study or what you're planning to do. And I think that the first thing is just communication. Um, Especially in like Canada, in the United States, and I guess like in the West, there's a very big emphasis on soft skills. So oftentimes people will, I guess, get opportunities or will move up faster because of their ability to communicate, their ability to speak, their ability to write, as opposed to those who are more technically focused. Obviously, that's a very over like broad generalization. So I just think that um, like if you're just coming here, it's probably a good idea to just familiarize yourself or strengthen the language base. So the oral communication, the written communication, all just stuff like that, because those are all things that will be applicable. Things like reading as well will be very applicable, regardless of what you're planning on studying or regardless of what you're planning to do. So I just think maybe that. Um, but I also am not an expert on that. So take what I say with a grain of salt. Someone says, "What's your time management technique?" Good question. It's changed a little bit now that I've gotten to school. I mean, university, but in high school, it was very much so my schedule was packed and there were things that I had to do. So it really left me no choice. Like I kind of just had to do them. Like that's, I guess, the one good thing about being very busy is there was no chance for me to procrastinate because I couldn't afford to. Now in university, I have like a Google Calendar. But one thing I like to say is number one, the amount of time you spend is not the same as how hard you're studying. Because if you have the right strategies, you can accomplish in 1 hour what might take somebody else 2 hours. And while that person may have spent more time than you, you've come out on top because not only did you learn the same amount as them, but you didn't have the time. So now you have, extra time that you can study more with or you can go have fun with. One thing that I do for time management is I like to vary my day. So I don't like to just do, all my class at once and then all my studying at once. I like to, go to class and then after class, I'll come back to my room. Maybe I'll take a nap. Maybe I'll go talk to my friends or go play some basketball. And then I'll come back to campus, go to the library, study for a couple hours. Then I'll go to dinner. Then maybe I'll do some more fun stuff. Then I'll go back to studying. So I like to keep my day dynamic and like to keep things changing. So that way it's not like there's a big mental block. Oh, I have to study for 3 hours straight. I don't want to do that. But in my head, I know I'm just going to study for a little bit. Then I'm going to go do something else. Then I'm going to come back and study more. And it makes it a lot easier, at least for me, to sort of jump from task to task because everything's broken up into smaller pieces. So it seems a lot more manageable. Someone's saying, hi, I guess this is a more for Ontario students, but I'm wondering if you could talk more about your experience as a student trustee, the election process, balancing trustee work and other extracurriculars, etc. I do think it's a very rewarding position, but I also think it's a position that you should not go into unless you're truly passionate about the work. Here's a perspective I'd like to add. So I was a student trustee. There are more than 80 student trustees in Ontario. I was on the executive council for the student trustees, and I was the vice president on the public side. So that means that there was a president on the public side, a president of the entire organization, a vice president on the Catholic side, and a president on the Catholic side, and many other executive members slightly under. And out of that entire group, almost, I would say, out of the 80 student trustees, maybe like 40 or 50 or 60 of them applied to America. There are two of us in the States. One of them is me, and I go to Harvard, and the other one goes to Carnegie Mellon and does, I think, computer engineering or something like that. So if you're going into it because you think it'll get you into an Ivy, that's not the case. Or I guess, because if you think about it, two of 60, 1 in 30, like a 3.33% chance. Um, Not that high, pretty much on par with the standard acceptance rate. But if you are passionate about the work, the election process looks different depending on your school district. So some schools, it depends basically how big your school district will like as the size of your school district will dictate how competitive it is. So I can't really speak to the election process just because it's really different from school to school. I'd recommend you just message the student trustee from your district, and they can tell you about it. And then when it comes to balancing trustee work and other extracurriculars, and this is also why I say don't do it unless you really care about it because it's a lot of work. There was a period of like there was this 1 month in grade 12, a month, 4 weeks, 5 school days a week, 20 school days. I missed 10 of those 20 school days because I was out of town for student trustee work. And then that doesn't even count the days where I was at school. I would have meetings until like 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 12 a.m. Like I'd eat dinner there. I would live and breathe the boardroom over there. And like some of my best friends were like 60, 70-year olds. That's how much time I spent there. So it's really something that you want to make sure you're able to, like, you're already on top of things, and that you're able to take on a commitment that big. Um, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work. Some people do it for 2 years. I started in grade 12. I mean, like, I only did it for 1 year and then I graduated, so I couldn't do it again. But I think, like, if you told me I could go back in time and do it for 2 years, I don't know if I would because it was very taxing and very tiring. But would I do that 1 year again? For sure. Probably one of the most transformative things I've done in my life. Someone says, what is your Common App essay? Do you have an interview with Harvard? I guess I'll do the interview thing. Um, it's not like this at every school, but at Harvard, interviews are based on availability of the interviewer, not on your, I guess, chances of succeeding. So at some schools, you'll only get an interview if they deem you a strong applicant, right? They'll say, yes, we're going to interview this kid because we think they have a good chance of getting accepted to our school. The thing about Harvard is they interview based on if they can find you an interviewer. So if you're from a place like Toronto, there will be a lot of interviewers in your region. And interviewers are alumni. So for example, when I graduate, I can sign up to be an interviewer. In Ottawa, there are a couple. In Vancouver, there are a good amount. If you're from any major American city, that's good. But let's say you're from Sarnia in Ontario, very small city. Um, Chances of there being a Harvard alumni who's also registered to be an interviewer in your city is very low. So in that case, you might not get an interview, and it's not because you don't deserve one. It's just because they don't have an interviewer to interview you. So there are a lot of people here who have gotten in without an interview. It's not uncommon. And there are a lot of people who get interviews who are rejected. You know, the vast majority of people who do get interviews are rejected. So at schools where it's run like that, so for example, at Harvard, the interview doesn't hold that much weight. It's more so you just want to do relatively okay or relatively well. You just don't want to raise any red flags on your interview, and then you'll be okay. Um, but that varies from school to school. So I just encourage you. I'm not an expert on all the schools, so just take a look at the schools that you're interested in and see what their interview policy is. Oh, and you also asked what my Common App essay was. I think like my Common App essay was sort of a discussion of my extracurricular activities and how that sort of related to who I am as a person. I think the essays, it's very important that you use them as an opportunity to show the personality, to show who you are as a person. And although I talked about my activities, they were more so vehicles that were used to display who I am, and the focus was not on the activities themselves. It's a very nuanced process. Like I could talk about writing essays for hours. Um, but number one thing is that the essays are about you and that they show things that your application has not already talked about. So you don't want your essay to just be another, I guess, version of a resume where you're just talking about things you did that they already know about or that you put in your activities list, etc. All right. Someone's saying, did you self-study any courses? No. In high school, I only did the courses that I had at my high school. I only did them, the ones that were forced upon me to graduate in high school. I did not, do a AP class on my own. I didn't dual enroll, didn't do anything fancy like that. Another piece of advice I'll give is like if you can go on any of these admissions offices websites, I can go on the Yale website, for example, and it'll say, we do not expect you to have taken AP courses or IB courses if your school does not offer them. So for example, I did not take AP or IB, but I was not disadvantaged or penalized in any way because my school simply didn't offer them. So I had no choice, right? And these schools, honestly, if your school doesn't offer these types of classes, they would rather you not self-study one of those classes and you spend the time on something more productive. So like instead of self-studying for an AP class because your school doesn't have any, they don't really care about that. And like if you think about it from a big perspective, I know some kids here who took like 15 APs in high school. I took zero, right? But in terms of their high school, they were taking the hardest classes. And in terms of my high school, I was still taking the hardest classes available to me. So we were on a relatively even playing field. I wasn't disadvantaged for the fact that I didn't take any APs. If your school offers it, that's a different story. But you should never really feel the need to self-study. And in the end, it doesn't really add much value. And some admissions officers have actually said that they would rather, like, they don't like seeing when kids self-study because they feel like it's a waste of time and it's time that could have been spent on something else. Sorry, excuse me. I mean, I do think we are coming close to the end of the webinar. Um, I will, I'm happy to take like a couple more questions to close it off. But otherwise, I guess I'll just wait a little bit, but otherwise I'll pass it back to Queenie.
Yeah,
Thank you everybody for coming.
I think there are actually a few questions in like the Q&A section that I think a few were
Oh,
already,
in the Q&A section?
yeah, but maybe you can talk a bit about like, I think some people asked about like summer camps and also like connecting and like networking with others.
Sure. I can't see the Q&A, so it might be like
Oh, yeah, I'll just tell you then. So someone asked, how important do you think summer internships, camps, programs are in the summer before senior year?
okay. I'll split that up. So internships not important because internships aren't very realistic for a high school student. I'll speak from experience. Currently, right, I go to Harvard. I'm looking for summer internships. It's not even that easy. Like it's quite difficult for me and it's quite difficult for most first years here at Harvard as well. So internships in high school are very hard to come by. And oftentimes, like you'll see some kids have internships, but it's because they got it through a way that you'll never be able to do it. Like maybe their dad is high up in the company or their mom is a doctor, so they're able to shadow their mom or something like that. Um, so you don't have to worry about internships. Most people won't have them, or if they do have them, they're not really, like, it's not like they're interning at Google as a software engineer or they're interning at Goldman Sachs as an investment banker in high school. So you don't have to worry too much about that. When it comes to summer programs, I like to say, obviously they don't hurt. I did a summer program, but they also don't add that much. Unless there's like a couple really competitive summer programs, like MIT's Research Science Institute. Um, I can't name the rest off the top of my head, but some really competitive ones will add some value. But in order to get into those hyper competitive summer programs, you basically already have to be good enough to get into an Ivy to get into one of those. So you don't really have to worry about those. It's not realistic for most people. But I think, especially if you're from Canada or you're an international student, going to a summer camp in the States is a great opportunity to sort of see what the environment is like over there, see what the campus looks like, see what it's like to live there, see what it's like to be a student at those schools. Like I went to a summer program at UPenn, and I remember it was like a whole different world. Like I was not, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I personally did not like UPenn that much. It's a great school. Tons of people love the campus and things like that. I think it's just because it was super hot. And my dorm room was kind of like uncomfortable when I went there. So I just wasn't very satisfied. But after going to the UPenn summer program, like, I knew that I didn't really want to go to UPenn, but I knew that I wanted to go to school in America. And that's kind of what sparked that for me. So I think it's a great opportunity to just sort of see what's out there. Um, but yeah, they're not like a mandatory thing in any form. Oh, and I also did meet one of my good friends from that summer program, also got into Harvard. He's from Boston, and we're good friends now. So just a random coincidence, but it's also a great opportunity to meet people who will end up, doing great things.
Yeah, and I think I'll just ask this one question because I think it's like kind of a good one. So someone asked, how do you connect and network with other people? And what are some like successful people who are involved with your interests? And what are effective ways that to reach out and maintain connection?
So how do you connect to people? Like
Like
network with people?
network with other people, I think.
I mean, I think the most important thing is to just like you have to get used to the feeling of embarrassment or I guess like the feeling of shame. You just have to put your pride to the side and just realize that when you're sending like networking emails, for example, 99% of people aren't going to answer you, but you can't let that discourage you. And it's like that idea you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So, just throw as many as you can out there and then see what works out. For example, if you want to talk about college admissions, you can probably reach out to any kid who goes to a good school that you're interested in and ask them about it. They'll be happy to meet you. Like if you were to send me a message on Instagram or you add me on LinkedIn or something and you send me a message, I'd be more than happy to spend a couple of minutes talking to you. I might respond very slowly, but I'm sure I could find some time. And it's like that for most people. Honestly, like most people are very willing to try to help out people who just want to learn. So it's really just about finding people who, I guess, finding people whose paths interest you and then just reaching out to those people, just being very nice and just saying, I just want to learn. You think we could take a couple minutes, or maybe we can just go back and forth a little bit over email or something like that.
Okay, so I think we've reached the end of today's webinar. However, I see that there are still like a few questions that weren't answered. So like, if you guys want to get your questions answered, I think you can maybe like contact Anna, like he said, on LinkedIn or like through other ways so that he could potentially answer them if he finds the time. But I just want to thank you so much, Anton, today for coming and answering so many questions that a lot of people had. And I hope that many of you guys learned from today, and also you can use these for like your future as well for like university applications. And for those who like kind of like joined later on in the webinar and weren't able to hear like the first half or like the beginning, the recording will be posted onto the website where you can also re-watch it if you would like to like hear some of his answers to the prior questions. So yeah, so that'll be the end of today's webinar. Once again, thank you so much for everyone for coming today, and thank you, Anton. And I'll see maybe some of you guys next week at our financial quotient series. But otherwise, thank you so much, everyone. Bye.